welcome to the Christmas special of the Irish Economics podcast. As the focus of this special is Christmas, it's a lighter look at economics than what you're used to from the podcast, and hopefully it'll be a bit of fun. I've split the special into two parts because that's probably a bit easier to navigate. This is part one, and I'm joined by my good friend Shane Doherty to discuss the economics of Christmas. So Shane is not an economist, but rather an inquiring mind when it comes to economics. And whenever I meet up with Shane, he's always quizzing me about different economic questions. So it's a good guy to get on board to try and tease out some of the very important questions when it comes to the economics of Christmas. Huge thanks to Shane, actually, for agreeing to come on the podcast and help me out with this. We have a great chat about economics and the sort of economic rationale behind what we see at Christmas. We look at things like, is Christmas really important for the economy, the economics of giving presents, and we even take a detour to look at things like the economics of weddings. So if that sounds interesting, stay tuned and hear our thoughts on that. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know on Twitter, Instagram. My handle on those platforms is @IrishEconPod. You can email me at irisheconomicspodcast@gmail.com. And of course, make sure to tune in to part two. As usual, if you like the podcast, remember to subscribe and give a 5-star review on iTunes because it makes a huge difference. And I think that's about it. So I'll leave you to it and hope you enjoy this part one of our Christmas special. So I'm joined today by Shane Doherty. So we're going to switch roles here. I'm going to answer the questions for a change, and Shane is going to help me out by asking a few questions. So Shane, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Niall. Yeah, very excited to be on the podcast. I've been a big fan from episode 1. So it's I've got a few questions that I think they're certainly interest me. So I'm looking forward to seeing what sort of answers you have in store for us today. So right. Thanks for having me on anyway.
What's the first thing you have on the agenda there, Shane? We'll go into it.
Just when I think of Christmas and the amount of spending that goes on during Christmas, I imagine the months of November, December, the amount of spending and buying of presents and stuff like that, and even not just on presents, on parties and all that sort of stuff, decorations and all these things. I suppose the question I'd ask is that important for the economy? Is it a good thing for the economy? Yeah. How would you answer that?
Yeah, so when you think about Christmas and the economics of Christmas, everything we hear about is to do with the amount of spending that's going on and how important that is for the retail sector. And, there's research being done on this. Research by MasterCard this year claims that we're spending an additional amount of €755 on presents, and Retail Ireland in 2018, I think they estimated that spending in Christmas time, around December time, was €866 more than what happened at other months of the year. So on the one hand, we could think, well, this is a big injection, it helps the economy, but it's only important because that's the pattern of spending that we're used to. So to answer the question, is this spending important? Well, we have to compare it, what would happen if there's no Christmas, not what happens every other month of the year. And what happens if there's no Christmas? Well, would that money disappear? Well, money doesn't just disappear. There's a good chance we'd recalibrate our spending and maybe spend a lot of that money throughout the year in a more consistent fashion.
But just taking that point on board, would there not be, the type of people that this is the sort of people where the hoarders of this world, where they don't spend too much money at all, that the types that really you want people in your economy spending money, but there are certain types of people who are more likely to hoard, more likely to save. From that point of view, you're getting money out of those certain groups' pockets that you wouldn't normally get. Would that be
that's the next
aspect
point
of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the big question here is that are we spending a bit more than we would otherwise? And you think about all the parties and all the presents and all the stuff you're spending, and it does give you that little push to spend a bit more than you would save, and that gives a bit of a kick into the economy. But there's a few other things. There's, for example, November, people tend to cut back a little bit in anticipation for the kick at Christmas. There's also in January, people tend to keep a low profile in January as well. So whether the net benefit is greater than this, pulling back, that's the key question. Now, I know I was looking at some quarterly accounts by the CSO, and you see that pullback in January especially, and my intuition, I don't have the answer, but my intuition would be that perhaps it does give us this bump in expenditure. But one thing that's really interesting is that it's a big peak in expenditure at one moment in time. We have to accommodate that, and that can have negative side effects in the sense that we might have to earmark extra lorries on the road to facilitate this big bump at Christmas time. So we need to have Amazon, we need to have the post service, all these sort of things in place to serve this big peak. But then there's a bit of slack throughout the end of the year. Now, of course, there's temporary employment, all these sort of things, but it does lead to a different allocation of resources than we would have if it was all flat throughout the year, and maybe perhaps an inefficient allocation of resources. Maybe we have more retail space than we would have otherwise. So whether the net impact is good or bad, I suppose, is interesting.
Sounds to me like you want to abolish Christmas. No, but look, I suppose that makes sense to me. But I guess it probably leads me on to the question then. So if you're saying there would be a more that perhaps without Christmas, or perhaps without Christmas as we know it today, maybe we could still have obviously we don't want to abolish Christmas, so we could have still have a Christmas, but without this kind of hysteria over presents and one-upmanship regarding decorations and parties and all this kind of stuff. What are you saying? Would you advocate for a Christmas which is a little bit more low-key, maybe a little bit just more based around, a family dinner and a few small gifts, and all the rest of the stuff. So what would you say?
So there's this famous economics paper that was published in the early 90s, and it was all about giving presents and the value of giving presents versus the cost of giving the present. And the basic idea here is, like, if you think about it, if you go into a shop and you want to buy a new album and you say, oh yeah, I really liked Radiohead, OK Computer, so therefore I'm going to get the next album, Radiohead Kid A, and you're a big fan of OK Computer, and you think, well, I'm a big fan of OK Computer, I'm probably going to like Kid A. You buy Kid A, you realise, wait a second, there's a completely change of direction here, I'm not into it. You're after spending maybe €20 on that album, and you haven't got €20 worth of value out of that. And it was a good punt.
Don't say that there's no value to buying a Kid A. I know what you're saying.
We pretend that you don't like Kid A.
Okay, right.
But so you could say, well, you're after spending €20 on this album, and you thought you were going to get your €20 worth out of it, and you just didn't. And it was it was a punt worth taking, but you lost out. And maybe and as you go over all your consumption, all your different purchases, it tends to work out well. But this is one time it didn't work out well. Now that's something that didn't work out well, and you know your preferences. You know yourself better than anybody. Now we think about it. What if your aunt or your mother wanted to buy an album, and they're trying to guess what your preferences are, and if there's a chance that you're going to get it wrong, well, there's even greater chance that they're going to get it wrong. So they might end up buying you Coldplay or something, which is completely off the mark. And next thing is it's €20 that's completely wasted. So this is this idea of that gift giving. When you give it to somebody, you're trying to guess what their preferences are and what value they put on your present. And you're spending the money, but you would actually be better off in a lot of cases just giving them the money, letting them use their knowledge of their preferences and buy the present themselves.
Well, I suppose one of the best examples of what you're saying there, I would say, would be something like Chris Kindle at work, where you could have a staff of 30 to 40 people, and they all have to pick the name out of the hat of Chris Kindle, and you're assigned a €20 budget to buy for whatever that person is. Like in those scenarios, more than anyone else, that you're probably spending £20 on something that the person would have or ordinarily would never spend their own £20 on.
Yeah.
Like, that's probably the best example where there's no way these people would spend the €20 on themselves the way you spent your €20 on them.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So therefore, but there's value. There's two ways you can get value there. One, you have the surprise, and that's something nice. Everybody likes a bit of a surprise. And then you might spend €20 on something. You might pick out something for that person that they wouldn't think about. So basically, if we go back to the CD analogy, you could pick out a CD for somebody that they'd never pick out, and then actually, wait a minute, this is great. And then all of a sudden they're exposed to something completely new, or something like little novelty item that they might get a bit of a kick out of. So there is value in that sense.
What extent do you think are families and people really not putting in the research required to make sure you buy a present that the person would enjoy, themselves. Like is that really something that's endemic of our Christmas spending?
So that paper,
society?
that American Economic Review paper. Now this is in the early 90s in the States, and the experiment that was done was with economics students. And when they were doing the experiment, what they did was they said to, I think what happened was a student was given a present, and they were asked, well, what value would you place on this present? And then the value was compared to the cost, and the value was much less than what the actual cost was. So this difference then was the loss in terms of spending. So basically, like the cost really is a reference point of how much resources go into creating this, and how much of your, what goes into creating this item, and then the value placed on it.
Are the costs generally for these goods not artificially bumped up because it's Christmas, and because obviously these firms realise that there's going to be more of a market for these things during Christmas time?
Yeah, so that would be an argument, but I suppose that's slightly different in the sense that it's still the fact still holds in this case, where you're comparing the cost you pay with the value that you get, and in a lot of cases your value is less than the cost, so therefore it's a waste. So apparently in that paper, what he calculated was that the total sales of presents in the US in the early 90s was something like $40 billion. The total sales of presents in the United States in the early 90s was something around the mark of $40 billion. And then they estimated that Christmas presents involved an economic loss of more than $4 billion. So that's like 10% or whatever.
And what you mean by an economic loss, meaning that the
welfare is lost.
Ah, okay.
But welfare in terms of monetary. So when we were talking about things like surprise, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so on some level, aren't people paying for the feeling, and not just the people who are getting the presents, but I think a lot of those certain people who just love to shop on a Christmas. They love buying stuff for people.
Yeah.
Are they not paying for the feeling of watching the other person get the present, and the feeling that of goodwill and feeling good about themselves because they've went to the effort of buying presents, whether or not they realise if the person will like it as much as they think they will. They're paying for the feeling, their own feeling, not just for the person they're selling to. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely.
Or they're not much selling to, but they're buying for.
So there's a lot of critiques of that study, and that's exactly exactly along those lines. Basically, there's a value in for the giver as well as for the receiver.
A sentimental value, like that.
Yeah, exactly. But also then, the other side of the coin is there's nothing worse than getting a present that this person spent loads of money on, and you feel, oh no, you feel sort of bad that, oh, I don't really like it, and this is a lot of money's been spent on this, and then even worse again, I feel like I have to use it, like I have to wear something I don't like or whatever.
Well, I don't like that feeling of being given a present in case I don't like it. I actually don't like that feeling of opening up a present in front of the person who bought it for me. Because you feel obliged to be fake. Like, you feel obliged to be, this is fantastic. I love this. Oh, thanks so much. Like, and even if you do like it, you still feel like you have to do all that kind of acting, and maybe it's the Scrooge side of my character there, or not Scrooge, but there is a sort of an awkwardness there, but I guess these are only small silly details, but yeah, I mean, I suppose, if you don't mind me moving on, or if there's anything else you want to say about that we haven't.
Well, the big thing, I suppose, is that there's value in the giving of the gift. There's value in the sentimental side of it. The big economic argument would be, well, you should be given cash as a present, but because you don't lose that monetary value, that the person can buy what they want to buy. But
a tenner in an envelope, like the spirit of Christmas.
Yeah. But then there's almost this sort of, people don't like giving cash because there's this sort of, it's not no romantic feeling to it.
Well, can I just give you a sort of a comparison point here? Is where when it comes to Christmas, it's all about the gift. Do you know what I mean? But when it comes to people's weddings, people don't want gifts. They want money in an envelope. So is the reason for that because at weddings, because of hysteria about weddings, everything is so overvalued, and the amount of money you have to spend on weddings is way over what the price should be, because the hysteria, and so people are like, okay, the expectation so is that, well, because we're paying so much money for this,
so
we need you to give us, we need you to pay for our wedding, basically.
So I have a theory on that. Now I don't know how much it stacks up, but I would say that when it comes to that, you think about, okay, what are the costs in the wedding? The cost in the wedding is the hotel primarily, and all those things that go with it. And they know what, they have an idea of how much people are going to pay, and then they have an idea of, and that amount that people are willing to pay for the wedding. Now that this shift goes towards cash, they know that that's part of the income that they have for the wedding. So I would say that all these sort of economic rents, all these sort of value above the cost is being hoovered up by the hotels and by the organisers, and that sort of helps them inflate the price, because they know people are able to pay, and they're trying to absorb that amount of money. So if we went back to the days of people giving presents like whatever, toasters, things like that, and then that sort of extra income boost wasn't there, well, then maybe the hotel costs would adjust accordingly. I don't know. This is just something off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I actually, sorry for throwing that curveball at you, and actually, I don't even articulate what the correct, what I was getting at regarding the comparison point. I actually am not sure.
Well, it's to do with cash, I suppose, and so that comes back. Then you were saying that firms, do they inflate the prices or whatever? Well, they probably do, and they do because it's similar again, that you have this expectation, and they know that people are a bit more fluhuluk at Christmas time. They're going to be spending a bit more on frivolous things, and maybe they're not taking into account the different prices, and so that therefore they up the margin a bit more, because they know people are probably prepared to spend that bit more at that time of year.
Yeah, so that's basically what I was getting at. There is a comparison there between weddings. Well, actually, it's not necessarily, because I suppose there's a reason, and I think you explained it well. Actually, there's a reason why people wouldn't be as keen on getting presents for their wedding as they are at Christmas, and I suppose it's because they're obviously spending a lot more money on their wedding, and so they'll need someone they need their guests to foot the bill, basically. Yeah. Where Christmas is not, the amount of money you're spending isn't as comparable. But it leads me to the question then. Like Christmas and weddings, things like that, is where the idea of hysteria about almost we could call it even propaganda. Is it like that we have big businesses sort of cashing in on the hysteria and with regards to Christmas, with regards to weddings and stuff like that. So this would be my question: who are the big, maybe I'm already answering it for you, but who are the big benefactors of Christmas? And and who are the big winners? Who are the big losers? Are you saying the winners are the people involved in offering the goods and services at Christmas, and the losers are the customer? Does it ultimately come down to that?
So you're going on the same sort of line of thought. It would be a bit like because there's this glut of spending at Christmas time, and because people are maybe a bit more inclined to spend, well, perhaps then prices adjust according to that, and the fact that people are a bit more open to spending. Whereas if it was flat, if we had no Christmas and spending was flat throughout the year, well, people might be able to pick and choose and what they're spending on a bit better, and therefore the firms wouldn't be drawn in as much of like basically the difference between the value that I get and the value the firm gets. This is sort of divvied out between where the price is set. So if the price is a little bit higher, well, the firm is getting a bit more, and the consumers lose that bit more. So I imagine the price would be that little bit higher if we have a situation where everybody's spending loads, and we sort of have to. We feel like there's something incentivizing us to spend at this moment in time. Well, then maybe there is a bit of a more of a shift towards firms getting the bigger slice of the pie versus the consumer getting the slice of the pie of the total value of the transaction. Now I've no data or insight or actual evidence to back that up. That's just based on the sort of economic logic of, well, if people are willing to spend more, well, then the firms will take that into account when they're setting their prices.
Yeah, I suppose, but the firms actually create the hysteria as well, and then they have to obviously invest in creating in the hysteria, but ultimately they get a big reward from doing that. You know,
well, there's probably a lot of like marketing and everything to try and get people out into the shops and whatever, and that sort of helps build up the more spending on things that we don't necessarily need. Like going back to the way that the things are divvied up, one interesting thing that always comes to mind is if we didn't have, like, Christmas is really important for retail. We're spending a lot of stuff on things that goods primarily, like presents, whereas so it sort of distorts our spending patterns relative to what we would have done otherwise. So maybe we might have spent more money on, I don't know, like Netflix subscriptions or services as opposed to maybe buying presents and things like that. And that affects how we're allocating our money. That affects then how resources are allocated within the economy. And sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes that can be a bad thing. And also one interesting thing is that, you know, inputs are shared between important things and less important things. And if we have Christmas distorting our expenditure towards retails, well then maybe that puts a bigger pressure on certain inputs for the less important things, and then that might increase prices and make other things more expensive. So for example, one thing is people talk about in the last few years there's a shortage in helium, or potentially a shortage in helium. Now we use helium for balloons and we use helium for other like medical devices and stuff like that. So if Christmas comes along and we have a Christmas party and there's loads of helium balloons, well, that increases the demand for helium. The price goes up for helium. That means that the price for medical devices will be affected because there's a bigger pull on helium. So if we didn't have Christmas, perhaps we wouldn't be using helium for balloons, and it might benefit other things that are a bit more important in society. Now, that's one example. I'm sure there's other things like electronic devices that might share inputs, and if we're buying loads of flat screen TVs and this puts pressure on inputs for other things, well, that could have an effect. Now, it could have the opposite effect, that there could be research and development in things like TVs, and that could have knock-on positive effects for other technologies. So it works both ways.
Yeah. I suppose so. But I guess even just the Elo's argument about say pharmaceuticals as well. Like when I know it's not so much to do with Christmas, but like, do you know, where we have pharmaceutical firms who might be investing loads of money into making the next best shampoo or next best when that money could be like when there would be a sort of a societal value in spending that money on medicines, in basically, or very, but I guess maybe I'm going off on a tangent there, like, but is that
that's a different topic, all right. But it is interesting in the sense that it's the difference between the private benefit and the social benefit, and to correct for that, I suppose you would have to try and incentivize research and development in areas that have social value. So you would try and subsidize maybe, or try and or maybe have some sort of a grant for investment in research and development that has a societal value. So that could sort of correct for this. But whether that relates to presents and stuff,
it doesn't relate to presents at all. So please cut this part out of the interview if you don't mind.
But
so can we any sort of conclusions? I mean, there's been a lot of if you don't mind me saying, sitting on the fence a little bit. Like, it could have a good value, could have a bad value. So if you were to draw one conclusion about Christmas time from an economics point of view, if you were to send home one message with your listeners, what would that be?
So I suppose the big thing is, if you're given presents, there's a big chance, or a monetary present that has a high value, there's a big chance that you're going to, well, there's not a big chance, but there is a chance that you're going to buy something for somebody that they value less than the cost. So how do you get around that? Well, you make up a list. Now, that's not very romantic. You could give cash. That's not very romantic. Gift cards are a good idea in the sense that they allow somebody to use their value. It's not as ugly as cash. That has a benefit in that context. But I suppose, I think it was the economist Nordhaus wrapped up what the idea was, and he said that the value is in the thought involved, not the monetary value. So basically, people put more value in the thought behind the present, and that has value, but it doesn't have the sort of deadweight loss. So basically, if you're getting a present from a kid and it's a drawing, well, there's loads of sentimental value there, and that's really nice. The way I would approach the gift giving process is, if you want to give something with value, either find out what the person wants, some sort of gift card, and then maybe have a surprise alongside it, and have something that put more effort in the thought as opposed to the monetary value, and that minimises the chance of this deadweight loss, this loss of welfare.
Right, that sounds like good advice to me. So thanks very much, Niall, for having me on and letting me bounce ideas off you, because obviously you're more the expert on economics than I am. But I just want to take this opportunity to say well done on the podcast so far. You've had some fantastic guests and experts on the show. I really would recommend that people look over the archive, because there's some fantastic interviews there, really, and I've really learned a lot about it. And even, there's enough there for people who are very interested in economics, and then there's also, it's accessible to newcomers as well. So from that point of view, I'd have to say congratulations and keep up the good work. And thanks for having me on. And hopefully I didn't confuse you with my confused thoughts too often during this interview, but thanks again.
Okay, so I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for supporting the podcast throughout the year. As I've said before, it's a real passion project, and all the good wishes and value created for others really makes the cost and effort worthwhile. So thank you very much for that. If there's anything you'd like to hear, any feedback on how to make the podcast better, drop me an email on irisheconomicspodcast@gmail.com. In the spirit of an economics Christmas present, I'm not going to ask for a donation or a gift, but I would really appreciate a thoughtful review on iTunes. If you're not an Apple user, keep it in mind when talking to friends, or maybe share on your Twitter account or other social media account. So that's pretty much it from me. All I want to do is just thank you once again and wish you a very happy Christmas.